Well, he's finally arrived, the episode that everyone has been waiting for with the guest appearance by Matt Murdock as Daredevil. There's an old saying, be careful what you wish for, especially when the people who are supposed to be delivering upon that wish are a bunch of woefully untalented writers who work for a company that's more interested in pandering to weirdos than creating good stories. Get ready, because Daredevil is about to get Disneyed. She-Hulk is bad. Episode 8. We open with a new character known as Leapfrog. This is a joke of a superhero character, and he's attempting to stop some thieves, and it goes horribly wrong as his suit malfunctions and ends up setting his legs on fire. The following day, he's recounting these events to She-Hulk in her office, and he explains all of this, and that he wants to sue the guy that made the supersuit, which of course happens to be the flamboyant tailor we met in a previous episode. Side note, I neglected to mention this in my previous videos, but the tailor of the superhero suits is actually a character from the comics. His name is Luke Jacobson, and this is what he looks like in the comics compared to what he looks like in the show. I can't help but notice that there seems to be a slight difference in appearance.
Now, it may then come as a surprise, to the most naive among us anyway.
Which of course means that this is the third character in the series that has been racistly blackwashed, and we get to put another stamp on the card. The weirdos over at Disney just can't seem to help themselves, but in addition to racistly blackwashing this character, they also made him not straight. Flamboyantly not straight, I might add. Now, I'm not sure what to call this, though, because gay washing doesn't really sound right, but considering that this sort of nonsense happens all the time with current year woke Hollywood, I kind of want to have a more appropriate term for it. So if you happen to know of some kind of a phrase that would work better than just gay washing, please leave it in the comment section and I'll take it into consideration.
I'm an expert in nameology.
Regardless, Jen tries to convince her boss that she shouldn't be taking the Leapfrog case and that it should be handed off to someone else because the tailor is the only one who can make clothes for Shrek and it might be seen as some sort of conflict of interest. However, her boss says that Frogman already signed a conflict waiver and there shouldn't be a problem. He suggests that Jen try to reach a settlement rather than going through the court. And with that, Jen heads over to see Flamboyant Man. She tries to tell him about the situation, but Flamboyant Man doesn't want to listen to it and immediately starts acting in a very aggressive yet still somewhat flamboyant manner.
When a guy's banging you, you spin off of him.
He claims that he's never made a defective suit before, and he's so angry with Shrek that he tears up the dress that he was making for her. Then she gets upset and storms out of the building. The following scene, they're in a courtroom, and we're introduced to the lawyer for Flamboyant Man, which happens to be Matt Murdock.
I'm just taking this moment. This is cool.
As he enters the courtroom, he makes a bunch of blind jokes, which fall completely flat because they're cringe and awful.
I'm blind!
And you really can tell the difference in the quality of the writers on this show versus the writers on the Netflix version. Jen wants the court to get the client information from the tailor so that they can contact all of the other people who got supersuits. There's a few minutes of back and forth between Jen and Matt where they discuss the legality of it until we get this little gem right here.
May I remind you that the Sokovia Accords have been repealed.
I'm sorry. What?
What?
Like what are you talking about?
The what? The what? And the what?
What the hell are you talking about?
Yep, you heard it correctly. He just said that the extremely important Sokovia Accords have been repealed. Now you might be wondering, what the fuck is he talking about? Because that's pretty much what everyone with an IQ above room temperature was thinking when they heard this. In order to understand the magnitude of this monstrously seismic fuck-up that just occurred in this episode, we have to take a closer look at how Marvel actually is run.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
You see, there's a fairly large misconception that the MCU is following some sort of intricate master plan, and that all the different shows and movies are coordinating with each other in order to maintain consistent lore among them. Except that's not the case. That's not the case at all, in the slightest. This has been admitted by Kevin Feige, among others, at Marvel and Disney. The MCU does not have a well-thought-out structure. Instead, there's a very loose set of guidelines, and each writer for the different shows and movies are able to do pretty much whatever they want. As you would expect, this leads to a tremendous amount of inconsistencies across the board. Some good examples of this involve the multiverse aspect of the MCU. The Loki series, the What If series, and the Spider-Man No Way Home movie all have storylines that dealt with the multiverse, and yet the multiverse worked differently in each of those projects, as if the people who were writing them had no idea what the other groups were doing, because that's exactly what happened. The team from the Spider-Man No Way Home movie even admitted they had no idea how the MCU was actually going to handle the multiverse. They had no clue what was going on with the Loki series, so they decided to just do their own thing and hoped that it would all work out.
Can you see where this is going?
And that takes us back to the line of dialogue that was just mentioned by Matt Murdock. The She-Hulk series is now telling us that the Sokovia Accords have been repealed, despite the fact that all of the other shows and movies that have been recently released for the MCU have very clearly been functioning as if the Sokovia Accords were still in effect. But now we have what is essentially a throwaway line of dialogue that completely upends the entire MCU. But don't worry, it gets worse. The Sokovia Accords were an extraordinarily important part of the MCU during Phase 3. It's what caused the breakup of the Avengers, resulting in the near death and paralysis of Brody, forced Captain America and some of the others to live in hiding for several years. It was an incredibly important event with far-reaching consequences, and now the talentless hack writers on this series decided to use a dismissive line of throwaway dialogue to sweep it under the rug and pretend that it never happened or that it's just not important.
This is terrible.
This reminds me of a similar situation in the Loki series where the writers on that needed to get rid of the Infinity Stones. The writers for Phase 4 of the MCU simply don't know what the fuck they're doing. They want to move on to other things, to new projects, new characters, new stories, but in order to do so, they need to get rid of the old storyline baggage first. But since they have no idea what they're doing, they get rid of it in the laziest, dumbest, most insultingly dismissive way possible. Regardless, Matt and Jen continue arguing about obtaining a list of names for Flamboyant Man's clients. She wants to prove that there may be other defective supersuits, but Matt argues that none of those clients have agreed to have their identities released, and it would be a violation of their privacy. The judge agrees with Matt Murdock, and it causes Leapfrog to start complaining about how the suit was burned and now it's worthless. However, during this, he mentions the fact that he used jet fuel on the boots. Flamboyant Man then tells the judge that jet fuel was not supposed to be used, and it even went against the instructions that he had given to Leapfrog in order to properly use the suit. Leapfrog tries to backpedal, but the judge states that since he didn't follow the manufacturer's instructions, that the manufacturer is therefore not liable, and the judge dismisses the case.
You lose! Good day, sir!
Later that night, Jen does what she always does, which is to go to the bar and get drunk. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but it certainly seems like Jen is an alcoholic. Though for some reason, the show seems to try to treat this as if it's her being an independent, strong woman, when in reality, she probably should be going to some meetings. To the surprise of absolutely no one at all, Matt Murdock also happens to be at the bar, and the two of them talk for a little bit. They're trying to set up some sort of flirtatious thing between these two characters, which is not even remotely believable. Despite the fact that Matt Murdock is blind, he can still sort of see what people look like using his powers, and as a result, he always ends up dating extremely beautiful women. This was even pointed out by Foggy Nelson in the Daredevil series on Netflix. So knowing that, and knowing that Matt is always going after beautiful women, there's no reason why he would ever want to have any interest in Jen, because Jen is fucking ugly.
Know your fucking place, trash.
Say it with me, Jen is at best a 4 on a good day. To say that she is not his type would be an understatement.
That's also true. And I submit, still funny.
Matt receives an important phone call and suddenly makes an excuse that he needs to leave. Jen also gets a series of texts from one of the guys that she went on a date with. This is the rich and important weird guy from the law firm, so Jen has to kind of go and meet him because he's really important to the company. Jen heads there believing that this is something related to the law firm, but as it turns out, the guy just wanted another date with her. Or more specifically, he wanted a date with She-Hulk because Jen is fucking disgusting. At first, the weird guy starts bragging about how he won an auction for a Wakandan spear, but the government of Wakanda wants it back because they claim that it's some sort of cultural item and that it was stolen by colonizers.
Are you serious?
How does this make any fucking sense whatsoever? Wakanda wasn't even known to the rest of the world until just recently, and it was never colonized. It never had to deal with colonizers in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It's just a bunch of racist bullshit used against white people. So here's a little bit of a reality check for the writers on this show. When you refer to the thieves as colonizers, you're just projecting your anti-white racism bullshit. Fuck off. Also, I do think that it's kind of funny that Wakanda, of all places, would ever even attempt to take some sort of moral high ground, despite the fact that they had all of this technological advantage and yet did absolutely nothing when all of their neighboring African tribes were conquering, butchering, and enslaving each other for thousands of years. They just sat around and watched. Because for a very, very long time, there was a lot of slavery going on and not a single white person to be found in the entire fucking continent. But of course, Wakanda just stood by and did nothing.
I wonder if you're the worst person I've ever met.
Regardless, Jen gets kind of grossed out by the weird guy trying to flirt with her, so she gets up and leaves. As soon as Jen gets home, she receives a phone call from Leapfrog, and he claims that he's being attacked by some random guy, and he needs She-Hulk's help. Jen quickly realizes that Leapfrog is very close to where she is, and she heads over to try and help him. Jen arrives at the top of a parking garage where we see the person attacking Leapfrog is actually Daredevil. Jen gets in the way, which allows Leapfrog to escape, and then there's a brief fight between Shrek and Daredevil. But don't worry, it gets worse. Jen then delivers some cringeworthy dialogue saying she's going to whoop his ass, and then punches into the top floor of the parking garage. This causes thousands of pounds of concrete to collapse to the lower floors. Keep in mind that Leapfrog was still trying to drive out of the parking garage and was using the ramp system that was directly under Shrek when she destroyed the roof of this building.
He's dead.
All of this falling concrete would have easily crushed the car that Leapfrog was driving, killing him in the process. Not to mention, anyone else who happened to be in the parking garage at the time probably would have ended up dead under thousands and thousands of pounds of concrete. But Jen, being the total moron that she is completely and utterly oblivious to these facts and doesn't even consider them for even a second.
Identity-wise, a lot of boxes are checked, which means she's not going to be held accountable at all.
Daredevil climbs down the side of the building to chase after Leapfrog, who miraculously has somehow survived the falling concrete. However, Shrek jumps down behind Daredevil. She then picks up someone else's car and throws it at Daredevil, attempting to kill him.
But the last time I checked, killing was a bad thing.
In fact, during this entire fight, Shrek legitimately tries to kill Daredevil 4 or 5 times. And I want to emphasize here, she is not trying to injure him. She is legit trying to kill him.
Are we the baddies?
If Daredevil didn't have his powers with enhanced speed and agility, he absolutely would be dead right now.
Oh, they're going to have to glue you back together in hell!
But don't worry, it gets worse. While Daredevil's powers are kind of on the moderate part of the scale, he's been fighting supervillains with a variety of superpowers for quite a long time. He has a lot of experience with it, and he is significantly more skilled in fighting than Shrek is. And yet, despite all that, she easily defeats him with no effort at all because fucking of course. After that, she casually walks over to Daredevil, picks him up off the ground, and pulls his helmet off, revealing his identity. I can't help but think that even though Jen is supposed to be the hero of this series, she seems to behave an awful lot like a villain would. Matt then confesses that he is in fact Daredevil, but for some bizarrely illogical reason, Jen doesn't seem to know who the Daredevil is, even though Daredevil brought down the Kingpin, the largest criminal mastermind in the entire world, more than one time. This would have been national and even international news about his arrests and captures. And even though Daredevil's identity was a mystery, pretty much everyone in the entire country, possibly the entire world, would know about the existence of Daredevil.
You idiot.
Especially considering that Jen is a lawyer, there's simply no way she wouldn't be aware of who the Kingpin and the Daredevil are. But for whatever reason, Jen doesn't know, probably because she's a fucking moron. Also, the writers wanted to use this as an opportunity for Jen to make fun of Daredevil. She makes fun of his name, she makes fun of his costume, and yeah, this is all pretty much standard with the MCU. They don't allow female characters to stand on their own merits. Instead, they have to make female characters look better by tearing down the male characters, which is exactly what's happening in this scene. And trust me, it's gonna get a lot worse before the episode is over.
You make me sad.
Regardless, Matt explains that the reason why he was chasing after the frog guy was because Leapfrog kidnapped Flamboyant Man, and that they need to go and get him back. As they're walking away, Matt asks Jen if she's ever destroyed a parking lot before, to which Jen responds, "Oh right, I should probably leave a note."
I don't think it's funny.
Let's look back at the last few minutes. Jen collapsed a parking garage, which could have potentially killed everyone in it. And she also intentionally destroyed someone's brand new car while trying to kill Daredevil. But remember, since she's such a strong, independent woman, there's not going to be any sort of accountability for any of her actions at all. Because fucking of course.
The buffoonery is endless.
The two of them arrive at the not-so-hidden base of Leapfrog, and Matt is trying to explain the situation. He knows how many people are in the building because he can hear their heartbeats, and he comes up with a strategy for dealing with them. Jen, still being the stupid bitch that she is, continues to make fun of him and is going to ignore everything that he says. Really, the only thing missing from this scene is Jen accusing him of mansplaining. Daredevil goes into the building and begins fighting with some of the men that Leapfrog has hired. For the briefest of moments, we get a tiny glimpse at what could have possibly been considered good entertainment. And then it immediately gets completely fucking ruined.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Just as the fight scene starts to get going, Shrek drops in from the roof and crushes half a dozen guys.
So now we got a huge guy theory and a serial crusher theory.
Remember during the Daredevil series on Netflix when he and the Punisher had a deep philosophical discussion about whether or not it was okay to kill the bad guys, and Daredevil said that it wasn't the right thing to do because everyone, even the worst people, have a small little glimmer of hope, a little small amount of goodness within them, and by killing them, you are permanently snuffing out that goodness so that it can never possibly rise up to the surface. And he believed that it was more important to try to bring that goodness forth rather than to just destroy whatever was causing the problem.
No killing.
Putting aside for a moment the irrefutable fact that Daredevil was actually wrong in that discussion and the Punisher absolutely was correct, Daredevil still believed that, or at least he did up until about 2 seconds ago, because apparently he doesn't give a shit about any of that anymore, because Shrek absolutely killed all of the men that she landed on. Not only does Shrek weigh about 500 pounds, but she also collapsed several hundred pounds of bricks and concrete onto the heads of these bad guys
That look like they've been serial crushed by some huge friggin' guy.
They are absolutely dead, and Daredevil doesn't seem to care at all.
You can't keep getting away with it!
The two of them make it to the main room where Shrek is able to free Flamboyant Man, and she tries to convince Leapfrog to stop what he's doing before he gets himself into more trouble. In the background, Daredevil is fighting a bunch of the goons until finally Leapfrog gets panicked and he tries to escape by jumping out a window. Since he's not actually a superhero though, and apparently his suit still doesn't work properly, he ends up breaking his legs when he hits the ground, and he has to be taken away in an ambulance. But don't worry, it gets worse. It's gonna get so much worse.
No! Oh, please, God, no!
Jen and Matt are having a little conversation on the top of one of the buildings, and there's some really cringe and awkward flirting between these two. Matt says that the next time he's in town that maybe they should get together and go out. However, Jen, being the whore she is, suggests that they should just skip all that and go back to her place and sleep together.
I think I just threw up in my mouth.
Because in addition to being an alcoholic, she's also a whore.
That's not an opinion, it's a fact.
I do find it a little bit funny that the character of Jen is a man-hating piece of garbage almost at every opportunity, but at the same time, she is constantly seeking approval and affection from men. I suppose this is the sort of thing to be expected on a show written by overweight, middle-aged, single, undateable women who live alone in an apartment that reeks of cat piss.
God damn!
But don't worry, it gets worse. Somehow, they made it even worse. The following morning, Matt Murdock is seen doing the walk of shame, and he even has his boots off and is walking barefoot.
What a story.
For those of you unfamiliar, the walk of shame is what sleazy, whorish women do after a one-night stand, and after looking at what Jen has done throughout this series, she would be an ideal candidate for this type of activity. Instead, however, it's Matt that's being degraded in this fashion because, after all, it's not called the MCU for nothing. Tearing down male characters is not just common, it's the goal. Back at Jen's house, she's talking to the audience and saying, well, that was such an amazing way to end the episode, but then she's a little bit confused because there's still time remaining left. Instead, the episode isn't going to end there because they still have to do the stupid award ceremony later that night. She continues monologuing to the audience, saying that because there's only one more episode, that means whatever happens at the end of this one is going to be some sort of big twist, and she even teases the idea of a Red Hulk. But as we'll see momentarily, the twist that the writers came up with is not a twist at all, and instead, it's extraordinarily painful to watch. The award ceremony itself turns out to be even dumber than I imagined. The Female Lawyer of the Year doesn't go to just one person, in this case Jen. Instead, it goes to an entire group of women who are all receiving the exact same award.
Whoa, this is worthless.
The guy presenting the awards then talks to the winners, and it has the vague appearance of being some sort of beauty pageant, and I'm guessing that this was meant to be insulting in some way, but it just looks really fucking stupid. And of course, Black Mallory gives a typical sexist, misandrist response when it's her turn. She says that being a female lawyer takes twice the work and half the recognition, which is not even remotely true. It's just more man-hating garbage from the writers that they're trying to project onto the characters. It's obvious, it's transparent, and it's fucking dumb. Eventually, it's Jen's turn to speak, and she begins by thanking her family for their support, when suddenly the entire presentation is interrupted by the group called Intelligentsia. There's a giant screen behind Jen, and the group starts using it to show embarrassing things about her, like her dating profile. They say that she stole her powers from the Hulk, and that she doesn't deserve them. It then shows a hidden video of her sleeping with the guy from the wedding. This is the final thing that causes her to lose control, and she smashes the screen.
I mean, a pretty brilliant maneuver on her part.
She makes her way outside, and a group of armed men stop her, and she regains control of herself. This is what we have now. The writers on this show decided that the main villain is going to be a bunch of angry misogynists on the internet. Yep, that's how far the MCU has sunk. Now, something I want to point out about these villains is that it appears the show creators are deliberately trying to make them look like a particular YouTuber named Doomcock. He has a channel similar to what I do, except he puts on a much larger theatrical performance in his videos. He wears a costume and uses a voice modulator. It's all themed around what you might have seen in a 1980s science fiction movie. That's kind of his whole thing. When the Intelligentsia interrupt the award show, they also provide some video of themselves. However, they happen to be wearing helmets that look strikingly familiar to what Doomcock wears. They're also using a voice modulator, which again, seems very similar to what he does.
Coincidence? I think not!
This might seem like coincidence because a lot of villains in movies do use voice modulators to try to hide their real voice and that sort of thing. But when you take a look at Doomcock's helmet and compare it to what's being worn in the show, it's very clear that they were trying to make something that looks similar to what he's doing. And all of this seems to ring a little bit closer to home when you realize that Doomcock is one of the most outspoken YouTubers against Hollywood, or specifically woke Hollywood. He's been mentioned in quite a few news articles and tends to be a fairly prominent figure on YouTube as a Hollywood critic. Of course, anytime he criticizes these terrible movies and shows, He's targeted with all the usual false accusations from those woke weirdos. They claim he's a nist and a phobe and this and that and all the other nonsense. It's the same thing that they try to do to me as well, except he's a much bigger target for them. There's no doubt in my mind that the show creators were using him as a template in order to attack and smear him. After all, look at what they did in the first few episodes of this series, where they were making very obvious straw man attacks against anyone who might possibly criticize it. And we've also recently learned that the entire point of this series was so that they could attack the fans, and they could go after anyone who might possibly be critical of the MCU. That was their goal. So the fact that they're very, very obviously going after fans, it doesn't surprise me at all that they would also make this villain to look like one of the biggest critics. And here's what we got from this episode. We saw the destruction of a fan-favorite character, Daredevil, the introduction of probably the worst villain ever created, and you might think that it couldn't possibly get any worse, but trust me, the monumental stupidity in this episode is nothing compared to what we're going to get in the finale. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 8.
I'm taking shots at the enemy. I'm gonna make it to the top, leave a legacy. If I got something to say, you better let me speak. Turn it up a new degree, bitch, you ain't seen anything. I pop off with the new rock, electronic, blow the smoke